Okay, greetings, testing 1 2 3, testing 1 2 3. You're listening to me, your host, Tonic Better on Ligali Live, 22nd of July 2021. And it's just another random broadcast just to discuss kind of some of the news that's happening, some of the things that are kind of like popping into my head as I usually do in the middle of the night before I go to sleep. Yeah, so I'll try and make it a quick one. What is it, 23:43? Okay, so I'm going to just kind of whiz through some of the stories of what's happening, and I don't have the wonderful Alexander doing support today. So even though I have connected the Zoom, I can probably listen to you through an earpiece and stuff like that, and I can hear you, but I won't be able to bring you through onto the program. So if you want to make a comment, you can do it on the YouTube, and I'll keep trying to look while I'm talking. So please, if I lose eye contact, it's because I'm just checking for interactivity. Let me get started before I do all that nerdy stuff a bit too much. So what's the first story? Well, probably like all of you, I've just been watching Uprising over the last 3 days, and the final episode was broadcast this evening on BBC One. Steve McQueen's documentary, I've forgotten the name of the person he did it with, excellent series, covering the story from the New Cross massacre, moving on through to the Black People's Day of Action, and down to the Brixton Uprising. So it's a 3-part series kind of chronicling a really important part of our history, and that actually one that had effects that has rippled across time and transformed British society, even though you don't hear about this in schools, but it was a really transformative part of that history, of British history, those 3 incidents and our responses and our agency in transforming the way that the government and local authorities responded to it. Like many of you who are of my age, my generation, it was difficult to watch in places because we lived through it. I was watching it with Oleander. Her friend Rosalind was one of those who lost her life in the fire. It was quite emotional for us, kind of listening to some of the testimony of some of the people who are kind of feeling the pain, what it means to not have justice, not have closure, having this like open verdict for a crime. And when I say a crime, I mean I know there's this contestation about whether it was a firebomb, but I think one of the things that we're quite clear about, it wasn't any of the people who were victims who were burnt in the fire that caused the fire, which was kind of what was alleged by the police. The documentary kind of went a bit easy on the police in many ways. It really didn't go into depth about how the families were treated as suspects. I mean, it talked about it, but I don't think you got to feel the trauma. I could critique parts of it, omissions, things that were kind of like played down, but I think it was a really good job. It included the voice and testimony of police officers inside of views, and I have heard some of those testimonies before from other documentaries, and of course it doesn't have the same perspective as Melanie Shabazz, or the late and great Melanie Shabazz, excellent Blood Oil Run on it, but I think that it's a timely intervention and something that can contribute alongside something with that work, which gives it also another grassroots perspective to transform how we think about justice. One of the things I want to say is that, I mean, some of you will know now that I've finished my PhD. I'm such a Dr. Toyin now. It's really weird saying that. I've got to get used to it. Brother Dr. Toyin, yes, and I'll lean into that. But what many people don't know is that when I was actually choosing what a topic for my doctorate would be, and this is just a random thing that, that only a few family members know, I was so incensed about the story, about the lack of justice of what happened with the New Cross massacre. I remember talking to my family, thinking that actually what I'm going to do, I'm going to like put aside my own personal ambitions about dealing with ways of transforming activism in this country for our community, and actually use the 4 years to launch an inquiry through my PhD into the massacre. And I was quite steadfast on that for like probably around 6 months. That was kind of like my plan. I would just use the research to access witnesses and kind of do all that work to kind of get to the truth, which is very difficult. I was very emotional at the time, and in many ways it's good I didn't do that, because this film shows what happens when you have the resources of an institution like the BBC, paying the bills, documenting the narrative, and actually because I wouldn't have got access to all the police officers, I'm pretty sure, and also to those who were working with Scarman, and so I don't know why I'm sharing that, because it was quite emotional for me at the time. I think it's just trying to say that it takes a long time for justice to come, and obviously we're still not there yet, but the process is an ongoing process, and each one of us kind of like passes the baton on in a different way. And so Steve McQueen might not be known as this radical activist or someone who's grassroots, but through this piece of work, what he has delivered is a piece of activism, a piece of history, which we can now pass on forward to the next generation to carry on the baton. And when new forensic technology improves, I don't know, when we can find ways to evaluate testimony in a slightly different way, I don't know, but when we can kind of get to the truth in that way, we can finally secure justice. I'm forever the optimist. There's an African saying, the passage of time does not lessen the crime, and it's our responsibility, whether it's in this generation or not, next, to get justice. So our share for the work that was done on that, and just even though it's not mentioned, I think Professor Gus John was the only one who spoke about it when he spoke about people in the African diaspora. There's a lot of talk about West Indians and stuff inside the language at the time. Please don't have any, kind of like thoughts that those of us like myself and my father, and who come directly with continental heritage from places like Nigeria, that we weren't affected and that we weren't involved in this process. I wasn't personally involved in that process because I was young, free, and I wasn't really conscious at the time. It's one of those things that I regret. I was probably playing and video games and all kinds of stuff, and not really understanding the whole politics that was going on. But my father was kind of like in that realm, and others around us, definitely his friends, because he was a Pan-Africanist in that sense, so he had friends with Caribbean heritage, etc., and they would be talking about these kind of things. I just didn't quite get it at that stage. We were all involved in this, and it's not just something, and it wasn't just Jamaica. That's one thing that the documentary did. I said I wasn't going to critique it, but it was Africans from all over, from Beja, from Barbados. I mean, let me move on. Next story, it's quite emotional, as you can tell, so I'm rambling on, but there's a lot of things to think about when you're watching something like that it kind of evokes. Okay, what's the next slide? Okay, so the 22nd of July, 4 years ago to this very day, was when our young son, Rashawn Charles, was murdered by the police. And I just wanted to make that connection because it is an anniversary, and often we forget that justice hasn't been resolved. And we are often forced to fight for years and years and decades to get a situation that we have justice. But we mustn't forget. And at some stage, I hope it's not going to take another 10 years, we will make, and it's our responsibility to make a documentary, a film about what's happened with our Prince Rashawn Charles, because the uprisings that followed that went along the same trajectory. There's been a crime, there's a death in custody, police officer BX47. I think I put his name on the Ligali website. I've forgotten exactly. I think Matt. I think that was his name. They tried to hide it, but I went to the inquiry and it slipped out. And as soon as it slipped out, I wrote it in my notepad and then published it. Yeah, Matt. I don't care. So the police officer has escaped justice. We don't have the name for the plain clothes police officer, but I just want to extend my condolences and to the entire Rashawn Charles family and friends, and the uprising that took place in Dalston following a vigil. And you'll see that as a common pattern. A group of people come together in a vigil to commemorate their loved ones who's had traumatic deaths, and the police initially respond with caution, but as the night falls, they decide that they're going to go in with force, and they bring vans, and I'm not going to rehash what happened in 2017, but yeah. Now, the reason I use this particular article, however, is because this one was from the Evening Standard, but all the main rags were doing it. This one has the article that what happened was that Rashan did not swallow drugs before dying in police custody. And the reason why they had to say he did not swallow drugs is because there was an assertion, there was a release, and I think it also came from the IPPC, the Police Complaints Commission. I can't remember they had changed their name at that stage. Yeah, I think they hadn't changed their name, they were going to become the IOPC. They made a statement implying that he had swallowed drugs and that's why he died. And we've got to get used to these techniques and tactics, like from positional asphyxia or excited delirium, all these medical sounding terms, to kind of pathologize the Africans who have been murdered and say that somehow it was their anger or their rage or their inactions or them causing themselves injury that led to the police officers using excessive force that caused their deaths, as opposed to the excessive force, the unnecessary application of excessive force on people in distress by officers who are charged to serve and protect is what causes their deaths. And so what we have is extrajudicial use of force. It's like Judge Dredd in the comic books. It's actually murder. So that's the reason why I want to use that story. But what I thought I'd also thought might be useful on the anniversary of Rashan Charles' murder is actually giving you an idea of what happened with the resulting investigation by the IOPC. Now, I don't know if you can see it there, but there were 4 charges that the police were told, or the IOPC were charged with investigating. The first was, it was alleged that Officer BX47 may have breached the standards of professional behaviour as a police officer. I mean, he murdered someone, right? He murdered a teenager. I think Rashan was 19. And what you'll see as the response from the IOPC is that Officer BX47 had no case to answer. So the second charge was, it's further alleged that the initial rationale given by BX47 in a witness statement for taking Mr. Charles to the ground, restraining him and handcuffing him, and you'll see here the quote, i.e. to prevent him putting something in his mouth, that same allegation again, was called into question by body-worn video recorded at the restraint. And so they're saying that despite the fact that, I mean, this is in plain English, is that despite the fact that we made this allegation that he's lying about that he restrained him and flung him to the floor without any attempt to de-escalate the situation, any kind of like proper warning, whatever, he did that to save his life. The IOPC feel that actually no, he was justified in just flinging the boy to the floor. It denies the fact that the police officer was vexed, which is what we saw in his eyes, which is what we picked up from the video footage, or we, the vibe that we got, and they say there was no case to answer. Bearing in mind, this is the watch body, which is supposed to be acting on our behalf, on our complaints to investigate the police. No case to answer. That's what they're saying. The third allegation, the third charge they were asked to investigate is, further, it is also alleged that BX47 continued to restrain Mr. Charles after the officer was aware that he was suffering from a medical emergency. Now, you may not know, because if you haven't seen the video, I mean, it's bad enough, the video that you see that went into the public domain, that the shopkeeper Ali was kind enough to share with us, the community, because he knew Rashan, and he told me to my face that Rashan was one of those good child. He was always polite, he was always nice when he came into the shop. So when the police took all the footage, and they just came in and took all the footage, there was one camera that they held back and they passed that footage onto the family. And that's how we know what happened. Kind of like the Rodney Charles and kind of like the George Floyd, someone gets the footage out before the police can censor it. And that does happen, unfortunately. And so this is talking about, he still restrained him when he had a medical emergency. We know now, because we've seen the footage, and I've seen the extra footage, and everyone at the inquest has seen the extra footage, that there was another, they say it's a plainclothes officer, they say it was a bystander, but we believe it was a plainclothes officer. Let me get it straight. I know it's 4 years, so my memory can be a bit frazzled. But we know now that that other person, who was, we believe, a plainclothes officer, also helped to restrain Rashan. And when I say helped, I mean used force. So you're having 2 grown men restraining Rashan in using techniques restraining techniques that are actually not authorised in any police training guidelines. And this came out in the inquest, the completely unauthorised restraining techniques. What did the IOPC say? No case to answer. And then the fourth charge is, finally, it is alleged that there was an indication that he failed to abide by MPS policy and a College of Police authorised professional practice by failing to call an ambulance immediately and failing to inform colleagues that he was dealing with a medical emergency, and that BX47 continued to restrain Mr. Charles after he believed he had something in his mouth or that he had swallowed drugs. I can't remember the exact timeline now, and I apologise I haven't been able to do that research. I actually wrote notes at the inquest for myself. It's 4 years ago. What I do remember was that even though a WPC came in, I think, there was a delay before they actually asked or called in paramedics to actually help him. I can't remember the exact time frame, but I do remember us coming away from the inquest with the perception that if they'd actually cared about his life, if there was actually a sense of genuine remorse, then somebody would have tried to give him CPR, somebody would have tried something. You do see them in one of the other videos attempting some kind of resuscitation, but that's not their first instinct. I do remember that their first instinct is kind of like, you know, it's this kind of like avoid blame kind of thing. I mean, it's a different thing. And those vital, I think it's a minute or two or whatever, could have made a difference. They did not call for medical help. In fact, I think that's right. They called for more backup before they called for the police. Please double check that, but I'm pretty sure that's what happened. They called for more backup before they called for medical assistance. And then what happened is that they issued a statement saying that Rashan, or they implied that Rashan was still alive at the hospital. And that's what the IOPC was involved in, that cover-up, when the truth was Rashan had been murdered in the shop. And so this was just them trying to manufacture a narrative that, you know, Rashan had swallowed some drugs, they were trying to save him, he had choked on the drugs, they called an ambulance, rushed to the hospital and he died. And that's clearly not what happened. Anyway, there's all of that testimony. You can find it all out. Most of it's in the public domain. What do we have from the IOPC? The Independent Office of Police Conduct, or whatever acronym they got for this week? No case to answer. So the reason I'm talking about that is because if you've been watching Uprising and you've seen how the investigation into the New Cross massacre occurred, then you'll kind of get the feeling that there's a pattern happening here. And it's quite scary when you look at the time frame and you know, you see like decades are passing, and yet when it comes to these kind of cases, the police procedure of actually masking evidence, pointing out misleading statements, we know officers collude with their evidence, not thinking about medical care, you know, helping victims who are dying, but thinking more about getting more officers, more force into the situation. These patterns haven't significantly changed. I'm not saying that there's not been some kind of progress, but we know with the commissioner like Cressida Dick, who's in complete denial like an ostrich, what's happened is that the culture of police covering up when it comes to the death of African people still remains in the UK as a defining feature. And there's really an irony today, because I saw something in that rag, the Daily Mail, you know, on my browser this afternoon, and it was a story about how the gap between between black and white, you know, I don't use those colour terms, but between African and Europeans in America had widened, and it was this big gulf and this big problem. I was going to share it, and I thought, nah, I can't be bothered to kind of promote that stupid paper. But it did remind me of the way that the media works, that the British media always use this argument, well, you know, we have a little problem in the UK, but look over in America, racism is so much bad, it's so much worse, you should be happy that you're living in the UK because we don't do things like that. Well, no, that's a complete lie. And, you know, if you have watched Uprising, don't think that that's a piece of historical, you know, like a racial drama, something that kind of like happened a long time ago that can never happen again now. Understand it as part of historical continuum to explain some of the injustices, some of the social crises that are met, and the discriminations and the inequalities that are taking place in the UK today. You know, I'm not even going to go back to just even in issues like sport with Lewis Hamilton being racially abused despite winning the race, and he should be a role model, an ambassador for Britain, and yet, you know, he's been racially abused, not because he doesn't excel and he's not at the top of his game, because he's at the top of his game, but his African heritage, the Afrophobia in this country, marks him out as someone that's just not quite British enough. Let me move on, because I said I'm going to keep this relatively brief. So I talked about 4 years ago was the anniversary of the tragic murder of Rashawn Charles, but 4 years ago and around a week ago, was it a week or maybe 2 weeks ago, it's also the tragic anniversary of the Grenfell massacre. And, you know, I'm pretty sure most of you remember the loss of Plus, or 72 lives plus, and the fact that we still haven't seen justice for that. And what the media's done quite so deftly in its Machiavellian approach is that it shifted the narrative away from justice for the families who require closure, they require an understanding, they need someone to be held account, they need the police investigation to continue to find who's going to be held account for the murder. I think Jeremy Corbyn used the term a social murder, and it's, you know, it's a snap term. You know, whether it's done deliberately or through negligence, it's murder of their loved ones. And the discussion's now moved into an issue of cladding. Now, the issue of cladding is very important. I don't for one moment want to pretend that it's not. But the primary issue when it comes to Grenfell is justice. It's justice, and simultaneously working to make sure such a crime can never happen again. Now, the government's focusing on the second part to a limited degree. So you're seeing new regulators coming into place. You're seeing new legislation and finance being given to remove cladding from buildings that are over 5 stories. And I found it was really interesting when we watched the New Cross Massacre uprising, because if you think about the cladding laws that have been passed today by Parliament, they wouldn't have covered the New Cross fire. They wouldn't have covered that building because it wouldn't have been tall enough. And you can see now directly, if you make that historical connection, you can see that when the government's saying it's got to be over 5 stories before that we can take off flammable cladding, well, that wasn't 5 stories full. I think it was 4 stories full, if I remember correctly. It had a basement underneath it. So you could see that even in a space that was 4 stories high, we had 13 deaths. And yet this government, to penny pinch, when we know, you know, it can, if it has a political will to make the right decision, to penny pinch, it's saying that it's only going to affect buildings that are higher rise. That what they're doing once again is building in a legacy trap for another generation to suffer in maybe 10, 20 years time because of their penny pinching attitude at this particular point in history. So that's not even talking about the justice issue. But let's move on to that justice issue, even in the smallest scale. So today, buried in the news, was a story about this clown. Now, do you remember that there was a video being shared on WhatsApp right at the height of the massacre, when we was in our trauma, where somebody had created an effigy of of the Grenfell Tower and little racist like stick men and set it onto a bonfire? That's him, the property developer. Now he's in court and saying it was a distasteful joke. You know, I didn't really understand it was on a Cornwall's problem. Well, you know what? You know, I didn't find it funny. It was about as funny as a Jim Davidson joke, as a Bernard Manning's joke, as a Boris Johnson joke. And so we need to keep our eye on these processes. One of the things I haven't been able to do because of my work is that I haven't been able to keep up the Grenfell Media Watch videos, because what was happening then was we could scrutinise. The team's still there, but the pandemic, the lockdown, everything was it's a serious shock to our system. And we're still looking to resolve these issues. But I kind of want to raise this point here, because this is the sort of thing we would have picked up on. And there are other things that are sneaking under the radar. The issue with Grenfell, as much as it's about resolving the cladding issue around the whole UK and exporting those values around the world in policy, it's got to be about justice and accountability for those corrupt people who put profit before people. That's what they did. They lined their pockets at the cost of human lives. So that's kind of, what I want to share on that particular story, because I don't think anyone knew that happened today. He's in the High Court. And I think that we kind of need to keep our eye on the ball. These things are all interrelated. So another story that we need to be aware of that happened today. A friend of mine, Mark Wadsworth, he's one of the founding leaders. You heard of the black sections? I don't know if you've heard about the Gang of Four. Back in the day when, and again, the Gang of Four couldn't have happened without the New Cross Massacre. Because back then we didn't have any parliamentarians inside Westminster or from our community. And that march, that uprising, that stream of uprising led it kind of triggered a crisis in the minds of Europeans in the UK. And they kind of recognised that if they keeping us out of the political institutions, we weren't represented in these political institutions, then what would happen in Brixton, in Toxteth, in Bristol, and across the nation, these ripples of uprising will just continue and get worse to worse. And so there was this kind of angst and this kind of decision, and then you started hearing about projects like Black History Month. You started hearing about the renaming of statues and streets, or not renaming statues, renaming the streets and buildings to represent African people. And there was resistance back then, just as there was now. It was broadly the Labour councils that made those groundbreaking changes. Some in, Hackney, Brixton, Islington, they made these changes where you found that the most conservative ones were the ones that are most hostile to that sort of change. That comes from the Brixton Uprising. That comes from the Black People's Day of Action. So again, when I'm saying that the historical ripples come all the way through to today, that's something else that you need to be aware of. So that comes back to Mark Wadsworth. Mark Wadsworth was one of those who was involved in what's called the Labour Black Sections. And the Labour Black Sections were an organising group that really propelled, and you hear a lot about Operation Black Vote, and that was a kind of like a mirror of an American Black Vote kind of initiative driving African people to the polls. And later on in the years, it started doing a shadow mentoring program and stuff. But doing the real grassroots work before Operation Black Vote really took off were people like Mark Wadsworth. And what they were doing was campaigning behind the scenes inside the Labour mechanisms to make sure that we could actually get representation in Parliament that actually had teeth. And so you heard about the Gang of Four: Diane Abbott, Keith Vaz, Paul Boateng, and our beloved Bernie Grant. And, that couldn't have happened without people like Mark Wadsworth. Mark Wadsworth is a committed anti-racist. And, if you think that my ethical values are kind of like, irritating, I know people find my moral values a little irritating. I do not compromise when it comes to the truth, and I don't do wrong and strong. Well, Mark is even worse than me. I kneel before him. And Mark is, one of those commiserate, kind of like empathic, honest, and he can't help but just talk the truth, and it does ruffle feathers. I'm not going to lie about that. I love him. He's a great brother. Anyway, you might not remember, but during Labour's brush with morality, when it decided that it would elect an ethical leader in Corbyn, and it was going through a socialist phase and detoxifying itself from the new Labour mess by the Blairites, etc., it decided to throw a lot of people who had been loyal to the party, who had made this groundbreaking history, transforming the party into something that was attracting millions of young voters up and down around the country. It was kind of actually that chance of a real democracy that was representative of people concerned. Even if you're conservatives, it's always important to have an opposition that is strong, healthy, has values, unlike what we have now, where we have this blah, whatever. Mark Wadsworth was flung under the bus by the party with the bogus claim of him being anti-Semitic. Him, Jackie Walker, and a few others, as you'll probably remember. So the same way that I was flung under the bus, and even today there are people that you would not believe that are trying the same disgusting trick. And I will talk about that when the time is right. Trust me, I'll dish the dirt on those people who are supposed to be on our side, but decide that they're going to actually put their political and personal aspirations above the truth and the people's concerns. And I'll discuss that at another time. Today's not that time. Mark won his case against the Jewish Chronicle. They've given a complete apology. I called him today, but his phone's off the hook. So, I'll catch up with him soon. They've given a complete apology, and they paid him they've got to pay him a fine or a fee or whatever. It's damages, that's the word. Got to pay him damages for the libel case. And even though he's been exonerated, we know that once someone's been smeared with the term anti-Semitism, it kind of drags around like a stench. He's not anti-Semitic. It's the most bogus. It's just like Jackie Walker. She's an African, who's Jewish. I mean, people sometimes lose their minds with the idea of what ethnicity is, and they keep relating it to racial terms as if you can only be Jewish if your skin is a particular hue. But no, I'm not going to give you a lecture about what ethnicity is today, maybe another day. But the point is that Mark is not anti-Semitic. The newspaper that smeared him has now finally admitted that he's not anti-Semitic, and and that's, I would hope, is the end of that chapter. Whether he'll be admitted back into the Labour Party, I don't know. His ethics are quite strong. He's quite an honest person, and the Labour Party today doesn't have many honest people in it. That's not its agenda right now. Its agenda is just to win power by any means necessary. And if there's any socialists or, kind of like a modernists or kind of anarchists or people who just got a moral centre or decent heart. So if you're a vegetarian or veganist or climate change, I mean, anyone who's got kind of ethics, they're not really welcome in today's Labour Party. And we saw that with, they kind of like turning down the wonderful Jermaine Jackman as a member for the executive. I mean, what party would do something so stupid? Do you know what I mean? But that's the place we are now. So Mark, big yourself up. So proud of you, brother. So proud of you. You kept the fight, kept your dignity. Do you know what I mean? In fact, you never lost your dignity. I can't remember that because somebody put that into my head that somehow I had lost my dignity because someone else had called me a racist. And I had to remind them, actually, no, I never lost my dignity. Mark never lost his dignity. What happens is that he had to be dignified under fire. And that's a completely different thing. That's what we're dealing with. We have to remain dignified, or we're choosing to remain dignified. Because trust me, if you bring out the Ogun in me, if you bring, you'll find out what happens when Tony Agbetu decides not to be dignified and brings war to your front door. So, Mark, it's having elders like you that kind of give me hope. Let me move on. You see what that documentary did? You see what Uprising did? It just kind of it reminded me of who we are and what we can do and how the ripples kind of move across time and make radical change kind of possible. We have to remember that things will not always be this way. So, I talked about the change. I talked about what happened in the 80s, which happened immediately after the uprisings in Brixton. The naming of streets, the Max Roach Park in Brixton, it's not Water, it's the Maurice Bishop building in Hackney, the Nelson Mandela Council Estate, all these kind of things that happened immediately afterwards. Ken Livingstone was probably one of the best mayors London ever had. Forget all that Red Ken nonsense. Do you know what I mean? He's the only mayor of London who's actually apologised on behalf of London for Ma'afa. I know people made jokes about him crying because he's a sentient human being. And of course, if you're in politics, you're supposed to have crocodile tears. But he felt it. But, that's the kind of stuff that's going on. But that was all in the 80s. So today, 2021, well, I say today, it actually happened yesterday, last night. What happened was that Hackney Council, and when I say Hackney Council, I'm talking about the politicians now. They stepped up to the plate. Now, I've had my beef with them over over a few issues over the last few months. I'll tell you something. Trying to get people to be ethical in political life is difficult. They violate what are those principles called? I forgot the name of the Nolan principles. They violate the Nolan principles, left, right, centre. But because they're not enforceable, they kind of like hide it behind back doors. But you know what? Hats off. Because what's happened, Hackney Council, working with grassroots communities, working with activists, educators, people inside the council, behind closed doors, inside their museums, inside their archives, inside their comms, many of the names that you will never ever hear behind the scenes doing work. We all came together to get the job done. And this story talks about a community stalwart. Her name is Kit Crawley, whose name is her name is going to replace the name of I wouldn't use the term slave trader, because nobody was trading in slaves. They were slavers. They were oppressing, exploiting, murdering, raping African people. So we don't use the term slave trade. We're not business commodities, but that's another issue for another day. But her name, Kit Crawley, is going to actually be on the name of what used to formerly be known as Castle and Gardens. And this is important because that name wasn't chosen by me, the crazy Pan-Africanist, as some people would have you think. It was chosen by the people in the area who live near the gardens, the people who are likely to use the gardens. And Kit was this wonderful woman. We did a piece of public learning work. So we had a discussion, we invited people, community. I want to big up Emma, big up, there's so many people involved. I can't even go through all the names, but they did a fantastic piece of public engagement. And then these stories came out as we were compiling the names of what was going to be. And this story about this woman who just looked after the children in the area, everyone loved, she passed away, and it just seemed the right thing to do. We don't have to give parks and streets and monuments names of people. We can always give them symbolic names like freedom or love or justice and things like that. But if we are going to name them after people, what stops us naming them after people that actually stood for something, who lived for ethics that we believe in, that are local to the area? So that's what's happened in Hackney. And the councillors, apart from some stupid Conservative councillors in Hackney who actually were almost crying over the loss of a slaver, they actually wanted us to put his name back up. I'm not even going to go into that councillor's mentality. They passed that last night. It's no fanfare. In a just world, that would be on ITV, Channel 4, all the channels be recognising that this is a positive, progressive step, that a local school in Hackney has changed its name from Tisson, another slaver, and they're working on a new logo, uniform, all these kind of things themselves. Not some crazy Pan-Africanists coming into the school saying you've got to name it after Marcus Garvey. I'm just saying, you know what? I would like you to name it after me, like Marcus Garvey. But you know what? I understand it's your school. You lived there. It's your area, it's your space. I'm not talking about the same thing what happened in Camden, where they took off the Rhodes estate and named it Parkview. These things are going to happen. Sometimes the community is going to pick a bland name. Sometimes they're going to pick what they think is a neutral name. It's never neutral. Especially if it's in English, it's never going to be neutral. But they try. But it's their name. It's community, local ownership. So this is what's taking place, and I'm proud to play a little part in that process. And if it inspires others to keep doing the work as we take down and replace the names with ethical symbols and values across the borough, and that goes across London. I'm no longer on the Commission for Public Realm in London, and as you can see, the work, I met all the commissioners, I attended the meeting, and there were some amazing people, amazing commissioners, and I just feel gutted that because of what the racist newspapers did in demonising myself, that commission's kind of like, it's done an ostrich thinking, hasn't it? You've heard nothing. It was a fantastic project, and this is when you start to question whether these acts are politics or if they're genuine, because I want to see that commission succeed. I didn't step back for them to do nothing. I stepped back and took all the heat for that commission to continue the work. And I don't want them using my name or some rubbish that racists are coming up. I'll deal with the racists and I'll deal with those people who are backing the racists later. I want the work to progress. That's how we achieve justice, whether it's social justice, criminal justice, political justice, economic justice. That's how we do it. We don't hide from bullies. We don't kowtow to the unethical and the immoral. We stand up and we wear our values with pride. So, big yourself up, Hackney. Let me move to, I think it's going to probably be the last couple of slides. Dawn. Yeah. Okay, so I've just been ragging on politicians and I don't know, Dawn. Yeah, I mean, I'm a married man and my wife is in the house, so I'm not going to say anything, but my heart just beat pure love. Dawn, you in Parliament, that fight that people like Mark did, that we've all done, all of us who have marched. My wife was on the Black People's Day of Action march. Like I said, I wasn't conscious at that time. I was probably like around 13, kind of like playing on a Game Boy. All those struggles, to see you, and it's really funny because I was just talking about this the other day in the last broadcast about, you know, there's a parliamentary convention that you're not allowed to call these so-called honourable gentlemen or gentle people or whatever kind of nonsense they call themselves liars. And this is how I love the ancestors. And what happens a couple of days afterwards? Dawn just speaks the truth. She gets kicked out of the chambers because she's speaking the truth, because she has evidence backing the truth. But you know what? She spoke the truth. And what people don't understand is that, you know, their little narrow ambitions that are here today, gone tomorrow kind of things, you know, and all those unethical decisions that they make, which kind of like suit the moment now, are one thing. But it's moments like this on the 22nd of July 2021, when Dawn Butler confronted the Prime Minister and went against parliamentary convention to say, with evidence, that you are a liar and your decisions have cost the lives of innocent people in the UK. And then she was actually ejected out of the chambers for telling the truth. That is history. That's the thing that will get made into a documentary as time goes by. Somebody will write a play and that will be the story that goes into the play. That will be the poem that someone creates, because that's the kind of values that deep down the majority of people living in this space actually want their politicians to demonstrate. They want them to model that behaviour. They don't like the lies, the deceit, the crass commercialisation and exploitation and capitalisation of pain and the dithering and the incompetence. Those things people talk about, but those kind of things people do parody shows about in the thick of it, and they make a mockery. You know, Boris de Piffle Johnson, he might be Prime Minister, but after a couple more years, when life, the universe does what the universe does and shuffles on, and he goes on to the speakers circuit doing Have I Got News For You, like as an 80-year-old, and whatever goes on. When people with values, with intelligence, analyse history, the truth will out. And what Dawn did today, you know, I think was beautiful. And she'll be penalised for it. And the right-wing media will make jokes about her, and they'll try to make it like it doesn't really mean that much, that she did nothing. The fact that we haven't heard any support from the Labour leader, what's his name, Keith Starmer or whatever, you know, nothing from him. Former DPP. That guy used to be in charge of the Department for Public Prosecutions. You'd think that he'd be a very ethical actor if he's actually in charge of deciding which public prosecutions go ahead. What you're learning right now is that his values are all about his own identity, his own ego. You know, I'm supposed to call him Sir Keith Starmer. So he's another officer of the British Empire. People who have values can't accept those kind of titles. And I know that's harsh. I know there are people in our community who want recognition from the state. And that's in a way to say, you know what, you know, I've worked damn hard and you recognize me and make sure my name is eternal in your system. But the truth of the matter is, those particular titles, not the people, are siphoning the positive energy of the people that they're bestowing or trying to claim that they're bestowing honours onto. Dishonourable people cannot bestow honours. It's really important to remember that. If the system is dishonourable, it's like going to, I don't know. I was going to use an inappropriate analogy, so I'll try and think of someone else. Let me try and turn it into a cartoon or something. It's like going to Daffy Duck, and no, Daffy Duck is quite funny at times. I can't even think of a bad character, like Gilgamesh in the Smurfs. Don't ask me why. It's like going to Gilgamesh and saying, Gilgamesh, can you give me the Honourable Smurf of the Year title, please? It's like, how can he bestow an honour? You're the most dishonourable person in Smurfdom. Doesn't make any sense, but that's what happens. Instead, we validate a corrupt system, and that's what the state gets from us accepting these trinkets and these titles when we join the British Empire. We keep the system validated. It gets harmed when people like Benjamin Zephaniah or John Lennon or whoever it is, I think Gus John's another one who actually turned it down. When people say, no, don't want it, it's not ethical. That siphons its power off. And if more people did that, even if they just returned their trinkets, then, that system would just collapse. But that's another discussion for another day. Thank you, Dawn. I think the last slide is going to talk about the exhibition. Yeah, I went. Me and the missus. War in a Babylon. I don't know, this week the energy's been kind of really good. It just seems to work. I mean, the exhibition was superb. I don't know how to explain it. The voice, the perspective was authentic. So the curation, I know it's Stafford, and I wish I could have gone today, like on a Thursday, because I didn't know Stafford kind of like was, he was, if you can go on a Thursday, because apparently on Thursdays Stafford takes you around the exhibition himself, and you really want to be there when he's given the history, the unfiltered, undiluted truth. It's a marvel, and you know what I mean. So check it out. It's an amazing exhibition, and more importantly, so it's an honest exhibition. It doesn't pull punches. It draws on our archives, like from, and so not only are you learning about the history, not only are you learning about what, our ancestors went through, what our grandparents went through, what our parents, for some of you, went through. You're also learning about our network of organising, like parent groups, archives, the Black Cultural Archives that provide resources inside. There's a whole network that actually collects our history, that documents it. And we're just always waiting for the right opportunity to speak truth to power. And that's what this does. It speaks truth to power. And I think it's quite telling that the only African MP who's given a space of prominence in that exhibition is Bernie Grant. Now, some people might say, oh, it's because it's Tottenham focused, but actually it's not. Tottenham is at the heart of the narrative in War in a Babylon. Oh, without a shadow of a doubt, and rightly so. But actually, it's a national story. It's an international story. And so there was space for other people to be inside there. But, they just do little things that are just like, there's a room that honours the late Menelik Shabazz. So you can watch Blood Go Run. If you haven't seen Blood Go Run, go to War in a Babylon. Just sit down, hit the button, go with a few people and watch it. And just take in a bit of that history. If you want to pay respect to those who have been murdered by the police, go upstairs. That's the only problem. If you have mobility issues, then it's a bit disabling. There's no lift. But, upstairs, I think is it forensic? Oh, I've forgotten what the name of that organisation is. They did something for Grenfell, Forensic Architects. Amazing crew. They donate their time and energy putting together these reconstructions, with meticulous level of detail. And they break down the murder of Mark Duggan with such precision that, despite what narrative that the state is offering. And again, the 2011 uprisings, it does mention that. And what we saw today, there should be in a few years' time something that captures what happened in 2011 in the same kind of form. But that's inside the exhibition as well. So I want to close on that as well, just simply because, you know, we have this wealth of history, wealth of experience, wealth of knowledge. And, you know, I think sometimes we underestimate ourselves. We underestimate our knowledge and our capabilities and the impact that we have on the space and the environment around us. You know, we have made some significant gains. We've still got a lot of work to do. But, you know, watching the series today, yesterday and the day before, that was good. It wasn't perfect, but it was a really great series that you should watch. You should share with people who are unaware. You know, I think school children should actually go to delete the N word. I don't know what any African is doing, making a documentary where the N word is actually included in it. There's no need for that. But other than that, like I said, there's a few little silly things that I just don't get. But the whole thing in its entirety is an honourable testament to the struggles that we are going to continue to have. And I'm going to leave it there. I've been rambling on for a little bit. I hope that was helpful. I can see it's, God, it's 25-1. Thank you, ancestors, for giving me the strength to kind of, I hope this was lucid and coherent. I think we're scheduled to be back in a couple of weeks, on not this Sunday, but the Sunday after. I know I've got to put together a newsletter. I did write a newsletter, actually. I just wrote a really simple newsletter a couple of days ago, but work. This week's been head on, and I didn't get a chance to send it out. So, and it's actually dated now. I mean, I tend to write in the moment, and so I still might share it, but I mean, I'll have to contemporize it because I hadn't gone to the exhibition when I wrote it and all these kind of things. But thank you for listening. I don't know if you're listening now, listening later. Don't be concerned about the viewing numbers on this stream. One thing that people have never understood about me is that I'm always concerned about quality over quantity. This archive isn't designed, or this broadcast, let me hit the lower thirds, Ligali Live, these streams aren't designed to attract a massive audience when they go out. If you're with us and you keep us company, that's great. We get the Zoom integration working better, so you can actually join me with these discussions. That's what I really ultimately want. I want us to have a live platform where we can come together and chat when we want, where we want, you know, from anywhere on the planet. These are the kind of things I want in the long run. That's what Ligali is going to be working on. But the point of doing this is to archive our history, to put it into a format so that, you know, those of us who like to receive our news through orality, through this kind of form, that's what it's for. And not just now. You could be watching this 10 years from now. And if you are, I hope things are better. If they're not, understand that we are sending our love and energy towards you to continue helping with the fight for those that are not yet born. So on that note, I'm going to say Ashe, and may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us. And I'll say Ashe again because for some reason I said it back to front. Ashe.